Okay, this is a tutorial on using the Sado ORM object. So I've got my bootstrap here. In this example, I'm going to be using table data from the users table. So I have these few fields with some data. I can go ahead and set up a ORM class. Okay, so to link this class to the class or users table, I'm going to go ahead and go into the schema file. I'm going to add the table users. I'm going to add a key of user ID. I'm going to add a couple fields. And in the schema file, I can now declare that this table is linked to my users class. So I'm just going to say class user. Now if this was linked to other classes, I could also add a user, multiple classes here, but for now I'm just going to say it's attached to my user class. So it's that easy. Now it's ready to use. So I can say, I can load up a user with ID 2. So I'm going to say there's two ways to do that. I can say, I can put 2 there, and it will know that it has to load the record with key 2. Or I can say ID 2. I can call it that way. But for easy use, I'm just going to go ahead and say 2. Now I can test it and say okay, so I can go ahead and load that, and there, it's going to work. So in the constructor, it'll load the ID. You can also add other parameters here. So I could say so now these parameters are going to be loaded into the class. So one method that's called automatically in the constructor is the init method. So this is used to initialize your class instead of using a constructor, because that's used by the parent class. So now my parameters are held within the class property of params. So I can say go ahead and get rid of this. So I can go ahead and run this, and it's going to pull that first parameter out. And just like if I want to pull the second one, it's just going to be an array of params. So I can load that, and it's going to load 5. So that's a useful way you can pass parameters into the constructor. Okay, another way to load up a user versus using this method would be, say I want to ensure that the username, full name, is also an argument. So in here, instead of having just the ID, I can say user ID is 2 and full name. So if I load that, let's see, still should load. Not passing parameters anymore. So it'll go ahead and load it. So it's the same thing as basically loading ID, but now I'm adding an extra argument saying I also want the full name to equal Mr. Anderson. And that can be done with any of the fields, really. Also, another thing that might be used when initializing the object is to set an instance ID. So if you're using multiple instances or multiple connections that you set up in the bootstrap file, you can set instance ID of 2. So by default, it's going to be the first connection. So if you only have one connection, you don't have to worry about this. If you have multiple connections, say second connection, you would set the ID here, and this would tell this class to use the second connection. So that can be helpful. So you can also join models or tables together. Say I had another class, an ORM class called user ages, and that was backed by a user ages table that just had a user ID and then the age of a user. I could join that with the model join method. So the first parameter I'm going to pass is an instance of the other class. So I don't have the class defined now, but if I did, it would look something like user age. So I'm going to pass a new instance of that class. The next parameter is going to be the join on fields. So in this case, I'm going to say where user ID is equal to user ID. So that's if the key in the user ages table was also called user ID. If it was just called ID, I would just do something like that. So then the third parameter can be field prefix. So what this means is that anything on the table that's being joined, all the field names will be prefixed. So I can say UA like that. So when the tables get pulled in, it would look from the user ages table, it would look something like UA user ID and UA age. So it looks something like that. And then the final parameter that can be added is if it's a left join or not. And by default, it's going to be a left join, so you can flag it false if you didn't want a left join there. And you can add multiple joins here, so I could do another join below this called another method for model join. Okay, so if I wanted to modify the user data, I'm going to load user 2 again, and now I'm going to set the full name to something else. I'm going to say new name. So I can set the property to a full name to a new name, and then I'm just going to say save. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. Then we'll come back here and I'm going to load the user number 2 again. So we go ahead and load that up, and now you can see it's been changed. So I can load my table up here, fresh, and it's been updated. I can create a new record very easily. I can go ahead and just leave that empty, say full name equals new user, email equals email.com. So I can save that, run that, come back to my users table, and there's the new user has been added. So if I come back to my code here, I'm going to go ahead and add new user 2. And then after save, this can be useful. I can go ahead and get the actual insert ID. So I can now say the new record ID is user get ID. So I can go ahead and run this. So it says my new record's 18. So you can go and look at my table, and sure enough, that's the record. So that's how you can get an ID of a new record. At any point, so let's load 18, can delete a user with the destroy method. So we can go ahead and run that. Go to my users table, and destroyed it. The destroy method will return true or false for if a record's been destroyed. The save method that will save either a new record or an existing record and modify the data will return an integer of affected rows. So if you're changing a record, it should return 1. At any point you can get useful information about your object. You can get the fields in a model. The get fields method, so it'll show all fields. You can get the key. I'll show you the key field name. And a very important method you'll use real world situations is using the Sado instance that's attached to the class. So say I want to do a custom query for a user. So I can, for example, get all active users. So I'm going to say okay, so to be able to run queries, I need to get the actual Sado instances backing this ORM class. So to do that, I can say get Sado instance. I'm going to set this as a reference. So now the DB actually has the Sado instance as a connection. So I can say select okay, and then I can say printer. Well, actually, I come down here, go ahead and clear this ID. I don't want to load that user. Okay, so I can go ahead and run that, and it's going to bring back all the active users. Another way to do this would also be you don't even have to set a copy of the or reference to the object here. I can just say this, for instance, select, and then I can just return the get records. So I can go ahead and call that same thing. It'll work the same way. So that's just a way that you can actually call manual queries or do other things with the database connection through the get Sado instance method. That's it.